I guess you can see my slide. And yes, well, thanks for having me here today. And so I'll try to set my timing. So I won't speak too much because I'm known to be, I can speak for hours, but I'll try to be, let's say, give you an overview, let's say, bringing you or traveling together back and forth to the future. And clearly, exactly as Igor said, I've been working at the GRC in Seville, where I'm still based since 2009. And so I'm particularly attached to this project, as Max knows, as I've been following since the inception. I also contributed to a couple of other workshops, I believe. And so I'm very glad to be here today. And although this event was supposed to be in person in nice Fiesole, but now with the pandemic world we are living in, of course, everything has changed. So as Igor said, yeah, it's been working at GRC, and now I've just started say an academic position at the Danube University Krems, but in reality I'm also still very much working in the area of policy and in the area in particular of human-centric artificial intelligence, but more to come, let's say. So the exercise I'll try to do today is exactly to bring you into the future, or discuss with you some of the possible scenarios of the digital world and Europe could let's say, be shaped in the future, especially looking at the two topics that I've been researching while working at GRC, digital government transformation and the governance in the age of AI, or AI in the public sector and for the public sector. And then as it was said, I will also present some of the scenarios thinking that we just published a couple of weeks ago, and then opening for the discussion. I'm sure with Igor and all the colleagues that there will be a lot of food for thought, and probably not only solving all the problems of the European digital sovereignty today. So of course I will go through the slides, but if there's any question before or after, you can always interrupt me. And as I say, despite I'm not working anymore about GRC, I was very happy when the new commission, von der Leyen, was putting a foresight so high in the political agenda, with Vice President Maroš Šefčovič now having the responsibility for foresight. This is, of course, not new to the GRC and to institutions like the GRC that has been looking into the future and trying to assess the potential impact of technology and on society since its establishment. And in particular, I had the pleasure already 10 years ago to do an exercise as part of a project called Crossroad on envisioning digital Europe 2030. So we were already looking at the time at what now is very high hype in terms of artificial intelligence, machine learning, predictive analytics, and Internet of Things. But in particular, we were interested already at the time to look at how this technology could be integrated into policy making, so to make the policy process more intelligent. But clearly, one of the key dimensions of this exercise was at the time, and still I believe is today, is the way the society and citizens will actually adopt this technology and this process. And so the openness and transparency in society will shape the future digital realm, I would say. So, of course, I won't go into detail. This has been published 10 years ago. I think until 2029 will be still somehow, let's say, up to date, but then of course it depends. And clearly we see some of these issues already perhaps today valid. In fact, one of the main, let's say, issue that we have been looking at, especially when we talk about technology, is that we always see the new technology as a new paradigmatic shift. This was the case when the social media arrived, and I do this since many years now, looking at the Time Magazine Person of the Year and how these evolve. And if we look at the last decade in particular, we see that, of course, the phenomenon of Facebook and then also the Arab Spring in 2011 were very prominent. And of course, this was somehow stigmatized when Barack Obama, first day in office, actually signed the Open Government Bill. So somehow we could say already in 2012 that, open government is the new normal, and this just changing society and the behavior of our citizens. But clearly, we are still 10 years later only at the half, at least, of this battle for open government. And after that, we've seen other policymakers coming, prominent person of the year. So Angela Merkel, already in 2014, I believe. And of course, we don't know if she's more the sign of the personification of the austerity policy or more of the opening to the migration flows. But clearly, when Trump came into the scene, we clearly see that the balance is going more into closed world rather than open. And now, of course, this was not the case, but we could have easily had in 2018 a blockchain as person of the year, and 2019, 2020, 21, and probably the next digital decade that would definitely focus or could focus on AI. And this will be the main topic, and I'm sure you already discussed how this is very high in the political agenda and in the research one. And now another exercise I contributed to with colleagues of the JRC Policy Lab has been on looking beyond 2030. And here, similarly as to the scenario we built in 2010, there is this let's say, tension between, a super collaborative government, I called back in 2010 the Leviathan governance, recalling the Thomas Hobbes Leviathan monster. And then, of course, depending on the regulatory aspect or the capacity of citizens to be empowered, there will be different scenarios. Now, coming now to the, if you want, to the question, still very much update and still very much open is how actually ICT-enabled innovation can really transform governance and policy making. And of course, as Niels Bohr already said a long time ago, prediction is very difficult, especially if it is about the future. So for this, we, as part of the research I've been leading at JRC in the last 2-3 years, we've been looking at what is actually the state of play in digital government, and if this is really technology are really transforming the policy making and governance systems. So if we look from the policy side, we see that as it was for the first decade of this century, the last decade also seen a lot of declaration, political will. From the first in Malmo on open and trusted government to the Tallinn Declaration, and of course the alignment with the AI discourse on human-centric digital government, digital services, and AI, of course. And now with the new digital strategy for Europe, just adopted in February, AI adoption in the government and in public sector is becoming crucial, as the several roles the public sector has, and I will go back to this. And of course, now we are all fighting, let's say, in the pandemic society. Now, I won't go much into details, but this project has been set to exactly to better understand how innovation in public sector enabled by technology can transform governance systems, but the objective is how then governance can address systemic problems. And so some of the findings published in some of the reports we published show that actually there is limited, robust empirical evidence on what are the real effects of digital government transformation, especially when it comes to the more, let's say, governance variables such as inclusion, legitimacy, and participation. And this for a number of reasons that are not shown here. There was some Chinese interference, but basically we got some political, economic, and social factors that need to be addressed. Now, in this research, we also tried to look at what are the drivers and the barriers that are already known somehow by 20 or more years of literature, but clearly this shows the need to reimagine the government and moving from the digitization and even the risk of mirroring, so just reproducing online what is available offline, so with all the problems that this will create, or even more. And then, of course, how instead we need to move to transforming the service delivery and the governance processes. I won't go much into detail, but we have also developed a proposal for a framework to assess and better understand how ICT innovation can actually transform government and the policy design. That has been tested with some empirical cases, because this is one of the issues, I would say in a minute, that we have not yet, at least in this field, embarked upon in terms of having real empirical evidence. So on one side, and this is clear if we look at the change process as a strategy from an as-is situation as a to-be to a to-be status, and the need that we claim for reframing. So not only reorganizing or making the so famous business process of engineering, but actually really changing also the cognitive and behavior routines that are happening in the public administration. So also an issue of cultural reframing. And this, as I said, we've done also engaging with experts and stakeholders, because of course, while, and just this morning, I was reading an article that shows that actually, if you really want to bridge science with policy, it's not just a matter of having a good research or policymakers smart enough to understand the research, but actually we need also to engage in a co-production process. And that's what we also try to do, engaging with the stakeholders from different relevant organizations and of course experts. And as I said, we need to build evidence through not only secondary research or in the best case, some kind of best practice claimed or self-referential, but rather through experimental case studies. And so we have done, we have developed different approaches. I won't go into details, of course. If there is interest, there is a full report on the details of these experiments that goes from randomized controlled trials to online behavioral panels to more specific action research activity in different areas and in different cycle of the policy making. So just to summarize these, the key findings and the lessons learned, and as you will see, I try to always stick to the 7, the number that I learned this year. It's the lucky number in the Chinese culture. So we see that clearly there are limits of automation, especially when it comes to discussing about AI and machine learning, and of course of the productivity that could be immediately increased, but then in the long term it requires more investments so that the service are maintained and keep up and running. As I say, the reframing of the organizational processes is crucial so that we can move beyond the ever piloting that we see in most of these projects since many years now. And clearly legitimacy and trust are two important components that need to be addressed, but they sometimes can have a counter, let's say, productive effects if they're not managed well. And we have seen in some of the project, in some of the experiment and case studies we have conducted. Clearly, although, I mean, 2020, this should be obvious, but our research show that still we need to focus more on adoption and digital devices that are dynamic and they change by time. So it's not just a matter of have not and have and have not, but it's more an issue of skills and competencies. And clearly we need to be more realistic about the potential, the positive at least impact of engaging and opening up governance systems, because these can also have some side effects. And clearly, again, the importance of non-monetary effects is not just a matter of having, let's say, economic value, but social and political values need to be addressed. And this requires embracing the complexity that we have in these phenomena, and especially in the innovation in the public sector. So coming to the specific topic of AI, and this I borrowed this from my colleagues in the past. It was like, okay, we are now got to the real paradigmatic shift that we were all waiting for. AI is there, is going to stay, and this will be top in the top technology for at least the next decade and more. And clearly the EU has been investing a lot in policy terms. There is a full agenda for human-centric AI, you may all be aware, and from the declaration of 2018 to the coordinated action plan that also established the AI Watch, and then the recent strategy on shaping Europe's digital future with the twin, let's say, policy documents of the white paper on AI and the European strategy for data, and the new package that was just launched at the State of the Union or after the State of the Union on the digital decade, and more to come. So the coordinated action plan, I'm sure you are all aware, but there is this idea to really build a common approach to become, well, if not leader, at least compete in this race through establishing a trustworthy approach to AI. As I say, I had the pleasure also to contribute to the specific area on AI for the public sector that had a specific focus on trying to exactly understand what is the real use and the potential impact of AI in public services. And now colleagues are following up on these activities. But what we have done in the first year of operation was to focus exactly not only in theoretical terms, but looking at the real use of AI application in the public sector with a functional view of AI use. And we actually derived the typology from the cases that we have collected, over 200, and trying to look beyond just the design, but as I say, the real adoption and potential impact. So a report that somehow got viral this summer and still has a lot of, let's say, attention, made the first map of cases across Europe and within the countries that signed the declaration, so Switzerland, Norway, but also UK. And of course, although it's not statistically, let's say, significant, this is the first, as I call it, reservoir of knowledge, quite illustrative of the evolution in this field in Europe. And without entering too much into details, but two main issues in terms of key findings are that in terms of use, we still see quite, I would say, basic use of AI in the public sector. I mean, if we look at the COFOG, the classification of function of the government, we see still general public services, health, and economic affairs that have the most active use of AI, at least in our sample. That is somehow biased by the fact that we have been looking mainly at national cases, so we're working with member states and national authorities, but and we only have 30% of cases that are at the local or city level. But I'm sure that there are many more, and that's why there are new initiatives like the EU platform for regions and cities that will also look specifically at the adoption of AI at the local level. And in terms of technology, I mean, not much surprising, because this is a bit also what happened in the digital government or e-government in the past, is that there are simple and single technologies used, not much integration. And mainly we see an emergence of chatbots, some predictive analytics and computer vision for image recognition, some expert rule-based systems, but not really much in terms of advanced and paradigmatic change in the way technology is used, and intelligence is really up next. And this also has implication in the change and let's say that is enabled by this, so that is mainly incremental, technical, I would say, with less significant, let's say, reforms in terms of organizational change or work practices. So basically, we see a lot of challenges still in moving from the data analysis, so the focus on data, on machine learning, deep learning, and predictive analytics, to the real adoption from the end users. And now, as I already said, pilot solution actually become mainstream and institutionalized. So this is also mirrored by another analysis we have done using a framework developed by colleagues in the US for the US Congress that looks at the purpose of AI. And basically here we see that mainly these technology are used for supporting service provisions and engagement, up to 38% in our sample again. And 20% each is for enforcement, so detecting fraud or prioritizing specific targets, and for internal management as well. And much less in terms of what is the regulatory research, monitors of decision support systems, analysis that are really useful for feeding the policy making, or very less, much less, 5% only in our data set is to really use technology, AI, to grant formal benefits and right to citizens. So then another activity we've done complementary to another specific task of the AI Watch that looks at the entire set of national strategies on AI. We've been focusing on what is the claim that the published strategies have on using AI for the public sector. And we see that, and without entering again into details, as we've done also specific analysis by country, but basically we see that mainly we have much differences in the depth and scope of the policy actions. It's not yet clear to which degree these actions really contribute to AI adoption. And while there is a focus quite strong on data access and quality, there is less funding on the legal reforms that should be enabled to really use this technology better to stimulate or facilitate adoption. It's for this reason also that the Commission is now cooking the AI adoption program, although it's not clear how much of this could facilitate the enforcement, because in another paper with colleagues, we have also analyzed this using another framework familiar to social scientists, that is, the carrots, the sticks, and the sermons. And we see a lot of sermons rather than sticks or carrots. I see there are some messages, but I'm not at the moment following the chat. If there's any question, just let me know. Here again, another main topic, but I won't go into much detail as we don't have time. This will be actually Igor, let's say, baby in the future, is to look at how we really assess the impact of AI in public services, and the public value perspective. It's fundamental, in my opinion, so that we can really address the barriers and also the risks that come from using AI, especially in the government sector. Coming to the key takeaways and implications for policy, we see from this first analysis that there is a high level of heterogeneity of AI use across the EU. So we're not yet clear how these, let's say, best practices we are really all looking for can actually be replicated or scaled out, transferred. And the need to ensure the institutionalization of AI to mainstream services is fundamental. But as we saw both in the digital government and in the AI in the public sector analysis, we see there is still little evidence of what really works and what are actually the potential threats to the quality of the services. We see that the member states in Europe are, of course, embarking in this journey with a different set of strategies, but often we still don't see very much taking into consideration the dual or even triple role of public sector in the governance that I like to call with and of AI, and also now by AI. And we will come back on these later. And another last point of my 7, let's say, lucky Chinese number catalog, we have the innovative public procurement and GovTech approaches that are crucial for really adopting AI solutions. And we can discuss about these eventually later, or maybe even with the colleagues that will join later from the private sector, Julia and this colleague. If we now move to the back to the future again, clearly now with this policy arsenal, I would say, and with all the knowledge that we have gathered in the last 20, 30, 40 years, we're sure that we can immerse ourselves into the digital world with no problems, because we know everything, and this is just a matter of implementing. And that's what exactly the industry is preaching and telling us, that by 2025 we will already almost get close to singularity, and deep neural networks will basically help us making sure that we don't even need to go to do any basic public service anymore. But if we look at the situation, especially now in the pandemic world, I'm not sure that the expectations are really coupled with the social political trends we see. Of course, on one side, we have this debate on the impact of technology on our society that is increasing. I mean, Commissioner Breton and Margaret Vestager are making this very clear, that we need to somehow address the power of the tech giants. We need to regulate the digital sphere, and how to manage the algorithmic governance or the algocracy that could come out of this, or the surveillance capitalism that Shoshana Zuboff, let's say, emphasized. So we see two main dimensions of concern. This is part of the discussion we had within the DigiGov work. Is the role of the state vis-a-vis the market. So who will actually govern the digital transformation? And on the other side, the level of individual data protection. In this, we have two main theses that we have been looking at. One is the digital geopolitics. Well, you may all be aware that this commission in particular presented itself as the geopolitic European Commission, and there is a kind of tension at the international level about the digital sovereignty. That is a new, very hot topic, especially in European policy circles, although not necessarily. And I think in the discussion with Andrea, you already touched on this, not really clear what is it about and how to go for it. And data protection, that is a strong issue in the EU since many years. How can we manage these beyond the GDPR, considering now the evolution of the mobile telecommunications and the data space at European and international level? And how to make sure that Europe can have the digital leadership that it wants to have. The second thesis is about managing the uncertainty that sometimes is radical. So, because we have seen this during the COVID pandemic, we see that on one side there is the precautionary principle, so that we should intervene because we don't know the risk. And this has also influence in the debate about the ethics of AI. I mean, you look at the contact tracing apps, this has been very much the case, and why there's no adoption then of many of these apps and no basically impact. And on the other side, we see that, as Cass Sunstein said in his book already many years ago, often the risks, to avoid the risk, we basically don't intervene. So how we can then balance precaution and cost-benefit approach is of fundamental importance. This is what we discussed, and both offline and online, with some foresight workshop with the colleagues, as I said, were part of this expert and stakeholders group, and we came up with a proposal of scenarios for digital government transformation 20 years from now. And here we looked at two main dimensions of impact. One is how the landscape of digital transformation will evolve, exactly if we will have more regulated interventionist approach, or a more hands-off, laissez-faire into this discipline, both in Europe and worldwide, because now it's not only a matter of regional governance, but is global governance affected by this debate. And second dimension is the citizen, that as it is in established foresight approaches, is the counterpart to the, let's say, to the state or the government or the institutional dimension. And here we could have, as we still have today, I mean, passive, not really empowered citizens, even if they're digitally skilled, but just clicking on the GDPR notice without reading or really thinking about the consequences, to, on the other side, more active, really fully engaged and digital sovereign citizens. Of course, within this framework, we have pictured 4 different scenarios that, of course, are also in line with the previous scenario that we have seen developed in 2010 and earlier in 2018 on beyond 2030. And on one side, we see let's say the effect also of the current pandemic on a more fear and surveillance state. On the other side, a more precautionary, but maybe more inclusive digital governance approach, while the more status quo, I would say, with no big intervention, also, for instance, on the digital platforms, would be a status of apathy and closed innovation, because at the moment we are still really very much into kind of small words of digital innovation. fighting against each other. Of course, the ideal world is that we enter into a trusted and open innovation digital governance sphere, where we actually have, the maker and the shaper, so the innovators and the citizen that actually work together, making sure that we can really achieve that digital ownership, data ownership, and the human centricity of the digital services. And clearly, as we all know, scenario is only a possible world, a world that does not have to be, but may yet come to pass. So, of course, the future will not be any of this scenario, but will be a combination of them, clearly. And this will be very much decided by the decision that policymakers will take today, and they will have effect on us, and more so on our children and the children of our children, perhaps. So if you want to know more, we just published, as I said, a report on exploring digital government transformation in the EU, and the policy brief should also come out soon, hopefully before 2040, otherwise we risk to be outdated. And just to conclude, and also to stick more or less to the time was assigned, so we can summarize that, and probably this is not much new to many of you, is that we need to define the framework conditions for really innovating governance models and policy design, balancing between the risks and the possible negative consequences with the openness and the sharing of data and digital infrastructure that is required to make this at scale. So this means managing the governance with and of technology that is also now further amplified by the potential of the algorithmic governance or governance by AI. And this means also the capacity to really harness data power intelligence and not just being trapped into the risk of using, let's say, data and evidence generated by machine just for the sake of it. Coming to the final 7, again, policy recommendations. I mean, on one side, we need to govern this tension between exactly the platformizations. Recently, I was in a workshop where there was a lot of emphasis on the government as a platform concept. That is an old concept that some time pop up again. That is something many have been advocating for, but now it's a bit in antithesis somehow with the potential of the new technology. If you consider edge computing, for instance, that instead push for distributed networks and applications. On the other side, in terms of regulation, there is also a tension, I would say, from if you really want to enable, like in the industry 4.0 paradigm, any government 4.0 approach, that either we regulate strictly or we use what the French call the mode de régulation. So it's more self-regulation and let's say regulation by design, I would say. And this could also be the case for the ethical framework that have been so much prominent in the recent work, for instance, of the high-level expert group, but now need to be concretized by either standards on one side or conformity assessment of risk of the new technology, including AI. While we open access to data, we need, of course, to protect privacy and promote interoperability, a very old concept that has been there since 20 years, but is now gaining momentum again, even in the Digital Euro program, because if we don't fix the foundations, we cannot really go then to the upper layer of the digital infrastructure. These also need building capacities that really can exploit the predictive analytics and cognitive technologies potential, and creating a real culture of digital transformation within the public administration. Particularly, if I look at my country, in Italy, it's now a big issue under debate, because clearly we don't have the internal, the in-house competencies to manage the change that actually, for instance, the recovery fund that could be focused on technology and digital transformation would have the potential to enable. And this also means prioritizing public value and aligning the governance system with the sustainable development goal, the Agenda 2030, basically. In terms of future research, these are, I mean, you will have the slides, so I won't go much in details, but clearly, as I already say, we need to make more empirical and experimental analysis using sandbox and data spaces. Again, the other day I heard Andrea discussing about the sandbox approach. I mean, this is basically, it's like you know, when you test a new drug, like now, if you want to do a vaccine for the COVID, you first have to test it, but then you have to go back if it doesn't work before you can really implement it. And that's how in the GovTech, civic tech environment, this could be promoted. Also, talking about the COVID, just to come to the conclusion, that will also, let's say, bring some open issues on this, as we discussed with Igor, is how we can really consider the possible positive effects, if there are, of using more technology nowadays, that we are all somehow confined by law or otherwise at all. And now we can actually really understand the value creation or destruction of some technologies, especially when it comes to innovative public services at the local and regional level. And also the issue of how to assess technology by technology, or the integration of different technology, set of technology, and how these integrate into the public sector and in society. And so to conclude, I like to bring to the fore an old quote from Machiavelli that, as Christopher Holman highlighted in his book 2 years ago, aim to think of a system of institutions capable, through harnessing the creative energy of the people who constitute society, and to provide a means for the actualization of that human desire that is actually detailed in his main publication, The Prince. And it is in this sense that, according to let's say the reading of Holman, of Machiavelli, the Republic is the regime in which all the people can, exactly by means of their virtue, become somehow the princes. Bringing these now to the new dilemmas, the policymakers, and in the pandemic democracy that Lukáš and others already mentioned in April this year, we could imagine a post-COVID-19 society where digital technology actually could empower the citizens, crafting new ways of engaging in politics and decision-making. But of course, this world will evolve, and digital technology will mediate our action and automate deliberation. So the policymakers in Europe and worldwide must be able to keep the pace. And this doesn't look like the case at the moment, if I can be quite diplomatic. And so just to leave you with 3 open issues and research direction that I'm myself embarking on in my new adventures, as Igor said. Clearly, we need to link the AI and the public sector innovation phenomena to enhance the governance in the digital states from a public value perspective, exactly to look at the governance with, of, and by algorithms. But also we need to look, and this I think somehow by necessity, I would say the Commission is pioneering on trying to integrate the European Green Deal and the digital transformation to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And this I think requires rediscussing the social contract. I'm not the first one saying this, has been said by many, including by the World Economic Forum. And the role of cities and region is fundamental here. And finally, something that I hope the GRC will also embark upon in the near future, we should look at the democratic innovation and digital resilience in the pandemic society, really looking at how this technology and data-driven approaches could enable engagement of citizens and thus increase the effectiveness and the quality of policies on one side, but also their social acceptance and adoption. So I will stop here, and so thank you. And of course, I'm very glad to take on question or engage in the debate.
Thank you very much, Gianluca. I was thinking that you are not food for thought. You are a hurricane of information and ideas. So very much thank you for your great presentation. I have some, before opening the floor, because I was focusing at the moment in the chat, and there are a lot of discussion going on. So I have been processing so far a chat, but at the moment I cannot manage with this. So I'm going to summarize a little bit, at least my take home, before opening the floor for discussion. And of course, the microphone is open for asking directly Gianluca. So I have just my take home is, and I think Max also reacted this way, with the assumption that the emerging and existing technologies are not that new. I mean, it seems that the promises and the perils of from open government to open data to AI, that's not seems to be that different 30 years ago and right now. So that would be for me the idea that everything seems to be new, but it's not that new, and the problems still remains. So that would be the first take on for me. So, I mean, at the moment we are working in AI Watch as well, and I have the same impression as Max and Gianluca. So the second thing is something that we've been discussing in this Autumn Institute since Monday, and is the idea of the public sector having limited empirical evidences. We are talking too much, but we have very little examples, very little cases, very few cases to analyze and to maybe also to learn from. The third take home is something that you have mentioned maybe slightly, but then with the diagram with the X and I, which government and with the citizen, for example, Max reacted saying that where is the private sector with the elephant in the room? I think was very pertinent comment by him. So, and it's why I think that we need to, let's say, to experiment, and you've been doing that, I think from the, at least in the last 11 years and your career, but we need to experiment with the multi-stakeholder policy frameworks, and they are not still experimented maybe enough. And the last point that I would like to address your two theses that I think they were quite inspiring in this sense. The idea that we need to deal with the digital geopolitics because they are here to stay. And the second aspect that in the post-COVID era I think is crucial is how we are going to learn to manage this radical uncertainty onwards. So please, it's your time right now for asking directly Gianluca, so please don't hesitate.
I see there is also a question from Mercy Calomoni.
Okay. Wow,
on the chat.
It's a long one.
Yeah. Maybe while the other are thinking, I can also react to the. I went quickly through the chat and your comments, and well, of course, we can ask later in the panel with the industry, the public, the private sector. But I believe, and this is also part of the discussion in the chat I see, and I fully agree, of course, on the fact that. What we have seen now, and what was one of the aim of the research, both research actually, the DigiGov and the AI Watch in the public sector, was somehow to systematize the state of play and the knowledge we have today, because the risk is that I mean, we see now a lot of emergence. I mean, there are now 5, I think, special issue on AI in governance or in the public sector. So now it's becoming the new mantra. Everybody wants to look at this, but then when you see in reality, there are many things that have already been said or researched in the past. So probably we need to build more into the previous literature, and also what we have learned from the failure of policy making. Also, I saw recently a call for actually providing only a failed initiative of innovation or open innovation on a special issue by a friend in the Netherlands. So basically, I think, and there comes also the issue of the private sector. The private sector is actually very much at the center of this axis. Because it's the, well, I wouldn't say the elephant is the room, actually it's the room. Basically, the discussion there is how we, let's say, regulate the digital world that at the moment is very unbalanced to unregulated practices that, of course, we may be let's say, rhetorically trying to fight, or on the other side, working together to make sure that these really benefit the citizens. On the other side, I mean, I've been working in the private sector, and I will do again. But we have to be honest. So far, there's been a push from the industry into adoption of technologies, especially in the public sector, without really taking into consideration all the risks and the specificities of the public sector. So there, the multi-partnerships, a true multi-stakeholder partnership is required, and this is exactly the core of the scenario, the ideal scenario that, of course, may look a bit utopian, but is where we need to go if we really want to talk about, for instance, innovative public procurement, where the private sector, the industry, is not just taken as the provider of technology, but the one that built on the public sector, for instance, as a catalyst or as a platform then for the private sector to provide services. So I think this is the issue to be discussed. It's not just as someone only think about regulating the digital platforms, so to make sure that they are not, I mean, this is my opinion at least, they are not too powerful, because at the end we are all using these platforms for our services because there are no alternatives. So the issue is how we make sure that there is let's say a fair balance and a trust environment where we can also build and maybe stimulate then the digital startups ecosystems that is in Europe is still quite let's say poor, to be again diplomatic.
Thank you very much. I think that is there any question, because I would like to capture the question by Ersi. When I think that there are two questions, but actually there for me is just one. I mean, the way in which we need new methods in order to connect much better the public sector information disclosure and the citizen engagement. I mean, she's talking about the gap between these two ways. I mean, not because maybe there is no participation or engagement, or maybe because they are not a policy orientation, but the connection, the strategies, the mechanisms to connect both sides.
Yes, yeah, I was also looking at the question that is very elaborated, and yeah, you're referring to the question of Ersi, right? Igor?
Yes, 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 that's right. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think. I mean, this probably, I mean, on Friday, maybe you will know more. There is the AI Alliance Assembly. There exactly this discussion on how to move from, the guidelines or the principles that the other day Andrea also mentioned will go into more concrete, let's say, implementation steps. Because as I said, here the debate is about, leaving the industry, let's say, self-regulating themselves. I mean, the speech of our former colleague Norberto Andrade, now working for Facebook at the AI Policy Summit last week, was pretty clear. I mean, we cannot really open the data set. This requires a lot of work. And of course, there are issues of intellectual property rights. But on the other side, if we want to get to standards and really understand exactly beyond the black box of the algorithms, especially when it comes to taking decisions that can affect the life of citizens, we cannot limit ourselves by just saying this cannot be done. So we have to be a bit more bold, perhaps. So we need to really balance into this again.
Sorry for interrupting, but there is a discussion in the chat, intervention by Max, that I invited him to take the floor, and also by Henk, discussing about the real role of the private sector. According to Max, or what you said, is that the private sector has been pushing technology in the public sector without really understanding the world. So Max is inviting Richard and Julia to take part, but on the other hand, for example, Henk asks wisely, is there a role of the private sector to understand the public sector? I think it's a very good question, very provocative, Henk, thank you.
So you want me to answer, or you want to?
Well, I think I am asking openly, but of course you are the presenter, so please.
No, I mean, I don't, I mean, of course, there is a mismatch, clear mismatch about in most cases. Of course, there are also good, good example, huh? But I think that it's, like the saying says, you play tango, you need two to play tango. So, and this happens also, as I said at the beginning, we cannot only blame scientists if policymakers don't use the good evidence. We cannot blame the policymakers if they don't understand the evidence. So at the same time, we cannot blame the private sector only if they don't understand the complexity or they're not, let's say, part of the process of policy making. And on the other side, we cannot blame the public sector only if the private sector is, of course, taking advantage of this lack of knowledge also. So I think that there, again, the partnership, the collaboration, it's fundamental.
I wanted to hear or invite Richard. I think as a representative from the private sector, I think he might have many things to say, to contribute to. And also, Henk, if you wanted to jump in, please don't hesitate. Please, Richard, any reaction on that?
Certainly. As somebody who has worked in the public sector as a public official, and as somebody who has worked in the private sector, and somebody who's Dutch, I have very many opinions on this. I think if we're talking specifically about the role of technology and the governance of technology, my very simple answer would be, it is absolutely the responsibility of the private sector to help to ensure the appropriate and effective use of technology. Because over 40 years, the public sector have proven that they are not capable of that themselves. At the same time, the private sector has proven that it is absolutely incapable of acting in the public's best interest. So I think it's very easy for us to distill these kinds of questions into an A or B, but my experience has shown that the answer is never A or B. The answer is always A plus B, plus C, D, and E as well. My feeling is in 2020, where we are right now, and this might be true if you look back 30 years ago and 40 years ago as well, or maybe if you go back 100 years and you look at trains and cars, the public sector right now is so far behind in their understanding of the implications of technology adoption that there is an absolute requirement on the public sector to take some of that on. But I think the public sector needs to take responsibility for instituting a much greater degree of accountability for those decisions that come from the private sector. So I think the answer, quite simply, from my viewpoint, is we need to start by making the private sector, giving them responsibility for ensuring the effective use, but the governance of that has to come from the public sector.
Thank you. Henk, do you wanted to add something? I have seen that you were
no, not
ready
on.
to.
I have a complete different question, but I see that Hélène is asking already a question, so it's a priority, but I will come back.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, there is a direct question to you. I don't know, Hélène, do you wanted to ask directly Gianluca regarding the risks of new technologies? So happy to hear you directly to formulate your question. Thank you.
Yes. Well, sorry to shift the discussion. Thank you for the presentation. It's very interesting, but I'm particularly interested in risks and how you perceive what the risks with this technology are, especially within this public context, because in my PhD project, I'm more within the households and with the individual levels. So I was wondering if you could say something more about what these risks are and how they might be mitigated or balanced.
Yes, well, thanks for the question, and yeah, I'm sure also Max can say a lot about this. But I mean, some of these are, let's say, already already raised on the issue of the black box, no, and the explainability. I think Andrea Renda already mentioned the other day, but this is in general for all, let's say, AI-based technology and other also. But in particular, in the public sector, there are some famous cases, like the issue of the bias that are reinforced by all the data sets, and these are, of course, creating possible negative effects in terms of discrimination. There are famous cases in the judiciary systems, to grant freedom to some criminals or not, because they may offenders or not, because they may offend again, or depending on their status. And these are a lot of discussion that has been raising issues about the fact. This also have a specific impact in the case of the public sector in certain areas where it's more an issue of moral and ethical concern, for instance, when it requires social entitlement or for unemployment or employment predictive or personalized services, because this could, of course, have implications on who the service is provided. So it's not only a matter of, let's say, privacy and data protection, but also potential of nudging behaviors that the technology could push, but are not necessarily, so who decide if what is morally acceptable. And this brings to another issue that probably goes hand in hand with the debate on the public-private and civil society partnership, that is about, who trusts the trustee, and so who control the guarantor of the governance. So is on the public sector, the government, or what's the role of the citizens? Now, today is starting the IGF, the Internet Governance Forum in Italy. I will have the pleasure on Saturday to exactly chair the citizens dialogue, because citizens are not heard. So what is the role that people can actually have to shape the future of internet and technology, apart from the experts and the policymakers in the room, virtual or real, that are. So this is there is I would say, a new democratic deficit that is emerging in Europe and worldwide. So I think this is also the role of the scientists to bring this to the fore, because some of these can have very much negative consequences for the democracy as we know it today.
Thank you very much. I think it's a very good way to end up this slot on public sector and the relations with the public sector, the private sector, and the citizenship. This triangle that is not that easy to manage. We can keep going for ages about this topic, but I'm going to pass the floor to the next presentation.
See, Julia just connected. Ciao, Julia.
Hello, everyone. Sorry for the slight delay. I had login issues, as always. So.
Okay, so thanks a lot for having me again, and well, I'll try to follow as much as possible still today and in the next days.
Gianluca, thank you very much. I still had a number of questions, but it seems that I'm not allowed to ask them, so I have to to pose them you personally. I will do that, because it's amazing how much you are telling within, let's say, that 45 minutes. So it's almost too much, but it's nice to have somebody with the overview, pretending to know what's happening in every country of Europe. So that's impressive. Thank you very much.
Yes, please unmute and let's give an applause to Gianluca because of this great presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Anke, please, I'm sure we'll keep in touch quite soon.
Yes, absolutely. I'm not sure, Igor, or I am allowed already to take the floor, or
yes,
that you
please.
want. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have two speakers for our next session, and our next session is related to one of the questions we got from Max. What's the role of the industry? And it's always nice to have two representatives of the industry. And I prepared a number of questions. I even just sent an email to Julia. But more important is we would like to give them the possibility to start by giving their presentation and their view on the topic of this week. So Julia, am I allowed to invite you and to ask you the question to start? Because the other one is coming from the Netherlands and he's a man and